So here's another study I wanted to run past you. Gross misconduct, the nail in the coffin for antidepressants. This is written by Dr. Joseph Mercola, who I've had on the show. As reported in the 2023 system, first of all, just so we found out, by the way, I have a feeling this isn't going to be the nail in the coffin for antidepressants. I have a feeling they're going to somehow get around this. So remember this, as reported in 2023, they did a systemic umbrella review of the evidence for the serotonin theory of depression. And this is what the conclusion was. The main areas of serotonin research provide no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, and no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentration. So the whole basis for serotonin uptake inhibitors, which is what Zoloft is and Prozac, they completely got taken out by the knees, but they're still prescribing the hell out of them.
It does affect the urge to gamble. And also one guy won a lawsuit because he became gay, and that was held up in court.
So but they do make you more likely to still wear a mask in public. So that's good, right? Anyway, so here I want to tell you about this, the sequence treatment alternatives to relieve depression study published in 2006 was the largest and longest running antidepressant effectiveness trial ever conducted. And importantly, it used real world patients. So the authors claimed an overall cumulative remission rate of 67%. This study has since been used to prop up the idea that antidepressants work in the real world. However, the widely made claim that antidepressants work for nearly 7 in 10 patients in real-world clinical settings is based on a scientific misconduct and fraud. In his reanalysis of the study, psychologist Ed Peugeot and colleagues showed that, had the study protocol been followed, the cumulative remission rate would have been only 35%. Moreover, the STAR-D report omitted the stay well rate. Only 3% of the 4,041 patients who entered the trial and went into remission were still in remission at the end of their 1-year follow-up.
Hey, do you want to hear something great about this too? Obamacare, one of the hidden provisions in that was called the pregnant women's right to mental health or something.
Yeah.
And so they made it legal to give it to pregnant women for their depression.
Wow. Okay.
Previously, to protect the unborn baby, they wouldn't,
Yes, most clinical drug trials have found the effectiveness of antidepressants is on par with placebo. And many studies have debunked the serotonin theory that underpins the use of antidepressants. Meanwhile, large-scale meta-analysis show that physical exercise is the most effective remedy, about 1.5 times more effective than antidepressants for depression. Get out of here. Oh, so that's why physical exercise is suddenly linked to white supremacy.
Yeah. Can I just take Ozempic?
It's just one example. And here's just one example. Patients of how the studies were flawed on purpose. Patients who didn't qualify as depressed enough to even be included in the study in the first place were counted as remitted, as were patients who dropped out, mostly due to intolerance to the drugs. They also switched outcome measures and introduced theoretical elements in clear violation of study protocol.
Hey, my friend Brody's dead from 100% from
so
that.
We've also
he was telling everybody he didn't feel right, and they go, "That's normal.
That's normal."
And then he's a suicide. Wow.
So we also know that there's a connection that's in their own literature between violent acts or the urge to commit violent acts at people who take antidepressants, and it's also connected to most mass shootings, and so that's why mass shootings have exploded in America since the introduction. That's a theory, anyway. I'm not saying that's a theory. So, Dr. Drew, what do you say?
I've got a lot to say. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for 35 years. I want to remind you of a couple things. One is, are you aware that randomized controlled trials have only been around for about 75 years?
Okay.
No.
I know what they are.
People pretend as though that has been the basis of science forever. No, it's a relatively new instrument on the scene, and it is deeply flawed. It is to power it, you have to have more patients, a bigger N than the 85% of the RCTs out there. So we have lots of problems. People do a lot of manipulating with numbers as a result of learning how to use this instrument to make their outcomes the way they want them. But I digress. Back in the day, doctors would try things, and when they worked, you knew it clinically because the patient got better. Did they get better every time? No, of course not. But you developed a clinical sense of what worked and what doesn't. Clinical judgment has been marginalized. And I'm telling you, clinical judgment is, if you see lots and lots of patients like I did, thousands and thousands, you know what's going on long before the medical literature catches up. So I always have a sense like, hey, something's not right here, because that's not what I'm seeing. Like I remember I've used a great deal of Paxlovid, and I saw a bunch of rebounds. And what I got was, oh yeah, it's just the cytokine storm kicking in a week later. No, there's no cytokine activation, and there was something different going on. It was a lot of airway problems. It was something categorically different. Took 2 years for that literature to catch up, where people went, oh my goodness, Paxlovid causes rebound. And we can argue whether Paxlovid is a good thing or not. That's not the point of that. The other thing is the serotonin theory, so-called, as long as I've heard it, everyone knew it was sort of a fiction.
Really?
So it's always been known.
It's in the commercial. It's in the commercial.
It's sort of a construct.
We think it works this way. They don't guarantee it.
We think it works that way.
It was always magic.
now, if you interviewed Steve Kirsch yet?
Yes, we've had Steve Kirsch on.
So if you remember, Steve did research on fluvoxamine in COVID.
Yes.
And the reason fluvoxamine worked, at least we theorize, is it activates the sigma-2 receptor, which is an anti-inflammatory receptor. Right. And there are people that believe the entire effect of antidepressant is anti-inflammatory. That might be actually how it works. Even though there is a serotonin effect, that might be how it works. Yes, it does these things in terms of serotonin reuptake, but that might not be how it affects depression, really, because serotonin is distributed. Why are they? There's a lot of stuff.
Weren't they given one as an antidepressant, like a flu? Am I wrong?
But it works. But they work.
Yes.
But they work clinically. They work. But the other thing that we've known for a long time is two things. One is, and you pointed out in the studies, that keeping people in remission is a much harder thing to do than getting people into remission. Much harder. And psychiatric literature and addiction literature, the time horizons are far too short. An addiction, they're like 3 months or 6 months. That is ridiculous, because people, guess what they do after 6 months? They do drugs. They go back, of course. And that's just insane. It's always been insane to me. So yes, this article points that out, which is an important thing to point out. But the other thing, as it pertains to violent attacks, I have always put that at the feet of who is doing the prescribing of the antidepressants. Psychiatrists are experts. They know how to use these dangerous chemicals. Two things. We in this country have decided that all medications are good and medication makes life better. That is not true. Medications are all dangerous, and they should only be used when the risk-reward warrants it. Only. Now, if you're a primary care practitioner and you're going to use an antidepressant, you should be very careful. You should urge the patient to get an expert opinion from a psychiatrist. And here's what happens in a significant percentage of cases. They don't have unipolar depression, they have bipolar depression. And when you give them an antidepressant, they become manic and then they become violent. And so that's where the antidepressant violent connection is.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk to somebody who knows a little bit about what he's talking about. That's refreshing. So what do you say about them and purposely? So I know when they did studies on, for instance, ivermectin, because I watched Dr. John Campbell, who's also on YouTube, and he showed me how those were set up to fail.
Yes.
And
they didn't ask the people who report success with using these medication how it should be studied. They just started throwing ideas at it, arbitrarily. And of course, the main thing John was saying, it was that they were using the sickest patients, which was, of course, it's going to fail there.
Right. And they weren't using it immediately. And all same thing with hydroxychloroquine, where they would give a toxic dose they knew was toxic, and then they would say, look, it doesn't work. And
they'd put out a pangolin story about both of those. Yeah. Oh, a guy drank a fish tank.
It's
horse goo.
It's horse goo.
Oh, a guy fucked a monkey. That's where AIDS came from. Oh, a guy fucked a pangolin. They use the same trick every time.
Thank you for that, South Park. But Yeah, the oh shit, you've got me distracted with all your monkeys.
But remember how monkeypox came and went just like that? Remember that?
They were ready to pull the panic button on that and to induce as much panic porn as possible. It's weird how they're into it.
It's hard to market anal viruses.
You never make things better with panic. I don't care what we're talking about. Things like, you know, our mayor here in Los Angeles was telling us every day at 5 o'clock to shelter in place. Those are words reserved for an incoming nuclear weapon. And it was, and if you're a 9-year-old kid and you've been now restricted from seeing your kids, you don't think that's going to affect their mental health? What's wrong with these guys? Of course it did.
Well, let's just forget about it and vote for Biden again.
But all right, but hang on. Before the monkeypox. It was something I wanted to say. What were we talking about, you guys?
Well, we were
aging brain can't keep up.
We were talking about how they rigged the studies.
Yeah.
And they did that with the ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that I say to people that know my streams hear me say this a lot, that I was doing, you know, I do these reviews, these board reviews, these, you know, to keep my standing as a fellow in these academies and things. I do them every 3 years, and I do them diligently. And I was doing my rheumatology reviews, and lo and behold, I came upon a question that was essentially taking the position that hydroxychloroquine, this is the American College of Physicians, this is their recommendation. Hydroxychloroquine is so inert and so benign that if you have a lupus patient, which is where we use it commonly, it's very, very common to use it. If you have a lupus patient who gets pregnant, you should keep them on the hydroxychloroquine. It's the only medication I've ever heard a blanket statement that it's safe enough to stay on all conditions during a pregnancy. Never before. Tylenol, we don't say that about. That really struck me.
That's poisonous, though.
Right.
Hey, you know, you bring up, by the way, the vaccine recommended for pregnant women, I'm meaning the COVID one, just to let you know. And so what people also don't realize is how we're controlled, right? So the media, you're not going to get the truth about anything medical through the corporate media because it's owned by the people who want to sell you something, right? So, but also on YouTube, I'm not allowed to go against what the WHO says. And what that means is Bill Gates is controlling what I'm saying. What do you mean, Jimmy? Well, the former head of the WHO, they run on donations, right? They're an unelected body. And they run on donations mostly from billionaires like Bill Gates. And the former head of the WHO said, we have to go around the country with our hat in hand. That was the term she used. And said, when the people give us money, donate to our organization, we have to do what they say. Mm-hmm. And so the number one funder of the WHO turns out to be Bill Gates through the Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, which is another pro-vaccine NGO that he set up to push vaccines. So it's Bill Gates and China. Those are the two major funders of the WHO.
Well, and I'm sure you're aware of this treaty that's making the rounds, right? Where they're going to have sovereign authority over all elected officials to make decisions. We saw how great they were in the last pandemic.
I think that's failing, by the way.
So I'm actually going to bring that up in our next segment. So please, let's table that just for a second, just to let people know that I am now being controlled by Bill Gates, and what I can say about anything to push back against the COVID narrative, anything to push back against any medical knockdowns, whatever. I'm being controlled by Bill Gates, not only on YouTube but on Facebook. When I post a video I do on Facebook, it then gets a warning that this is misinformation and you better not share it. And who does that? A fact-checking group that's funded by Bill Gates or funded by. So this guy is, and people think that he's a good guy who just wants to help people. If he wanted to help people, why did he make Oxford University not give away their COVID vaccine for free, and he stopped them and made them charge for it? Why didn't he make sure that the poor countries got his COVID vaccine? There's so many things. He funds the media, and then he funds the NGOs, and then he funds the vaccine, and whatever he has his investment in, that's what's going to get the positive media. So I'm just letting people know that you're being controlled by a handful of billionaires globally, not just in the United States. And if we have a civil war in the United States, which is what the billionaire class actually wants, chaos favors the establishment. Just keep that in mind. They want us scared, they want us on edge, and they want us begging for authoritarian solutions to our problem. That's why they got you to turn on your neighbor. The establishment, a handful of billionaires, did a controlled demolition of our economy during COVID that smashed everybody except a handful of millionaires and billionaires, and they want me to be angry at my neighbor because my neighbor wouldn't take a vaccine that didn't work the way they said it did in the first place. Didn't stop transmission or contraction. And they never even tested for that, but they told you it did. Everybody from Fauci to the President of the United States to Rachel Maddow, famously, still won't apologize for it, said that if you get the vaccine, it stops, and then the virus can't use you to jump to another person, and that's how we're going to get to the end of this pandemic. Well, I had Dr. Robert Malone on my show in early 2021, and he told me you can't vaccinate your way out of a pandemic like this, and so I knew they were always lying. In fact, Andy Slavitt, who was the head of Joe Biden's COVID response team, Andy Slavitt tweeted out, nobody reported this, he tweeted out that the COVID virus is so contagious that even with vaccines, everybody's going to get it. Nobody, that's been memory hold. Nobody ever wanted to listen to that. I knew it. I was called a conspiracy theorist because I was quoting the head of the COVID response team by Joe Biden. I'm like, no matter. So that's why you can't have mandates. I was trying to explain to people, if everybody's going to get it anyway, then the reason you're taking the vaccine is for yourself. It doesn't stop transmission and contraction. And although I have to say, because Bill Gates makes me, that it does slow and will keep you from getting seriously ill, hospitalized, or dead. That's the beauty. It's safe and effective. I eat 3 or 4 boosters for breakfast every day. So anyway, I just wanted to get that part out, and we're going to talk more about COVID in the next segment. But one
quick caveat, one quick follow-on, and it's a guest recommendation for you too. Maybe you already had him or know him, but Mark Chankisi is a social psychologist, and he is also a physicist and a very brilliant guy. And you should interview him if you haven't. But he is one statement that stays with me all the time, which is, you mentioned that Bill Gates is lying to you or whatnot. It's not that. It's that in every case where large-scale social evil is done to populations, it is always done in the name of good.
Of course.
And by evangelists, people who believe they're doing what's good and are going to show you what's right, whether it's Lenin or whoever, you name it, or the Chinese cultural purge. These are all good people doing good things and harming millions of people.
Bill Gates is now genetically modifying mosquitoes, and he's releasing them out. They're releasing them out into the public to fight some kind of a thing that you. So when a mosquito bites you, that's called uninformed consent to a medical treatment, as far as I'm concerned. If you're genetically altering mosquitoes to do some kind of thing, and then a mosquito bites me because you genetically altered it, I'm not giving my informed consent to that, just like we weren't giving our informed consent to the COVID interventions because they didn't want to release the COVID data for 75 years. And by the way, they were all lying to us. Dr. Fauci lied about masks. He lied about herd immunity, natural immunity.
6 feet, made up.
Oh, just made it up, pulled him out of his ass. He also lied about funding the gain of function research that gave us the COVID virus. Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Bend, Oregon, Portland, Seattle, Philadelphia, Avenel, New Jersey, Boston, Palm Springs, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Berlin, and London. We're adding a second show in London. The first show sold out. See you there.